Who are the greatest deadlifters in powerlifting history? Let's find out. This is my third video in my series where I rank the greatest single lift specialists in the history of raw tested powerlifting. I've looked at the squat, I've looked at the bench, now it's time for the deadlift. Also, bonus points if anyone can identify whose back that is in the photo there. Okay, so criteria. If you haven't done so already, check out my squat and bench rankings where I go into this a little bit more, but basically I'm looking at the impressiveness of the lift, so how long the world records have stood for, and the ability of the lifter to use that as an advantage over their opponents to beat them. So we all know the deadlift specialists that you could be ahead by 50, 60 kilos on subtotal, but you're still shaking in your boots backstage because you know they're going to be pulling for the win. And this is full power meets only. Okay, so straight into it. Number 5, I have Mr. Sanchez Dillon, the 105 lifter. Now, this one, potentially a bit of recency bias here, okay? I'm not going to lie. But he's the current IPF 105 deadlift world record holder with 400 kilos, which is the lightest 400 kilos ever done in the IPF. The only reason it's not the overall world record is because there's another 105 deadlift freak who will appear later on this list. But yeah, he has it. This world record hasn't stood for nearly as long as anyone else on this list has. However, he's on here because of the sheer impressiveness of that lift. So he did that at Worlds last year. Also, at Arnold's UK last year, he attempted 411 kilos, which at the time would have given him the heaviest deadlift ever, regardless of weight class in the IPF. Now, he missed it, but he got it to his knees, which I still find impressive. I know that I shouldn't rank on missed lifts, but there is something to be said about coming pretty close to pulling the heaviest deadlift ever as a 105, 2 weight classes below the super heavyweights. Also, at British Nationals, he kind of sort of pulled 408.5. So he attempted 408.5 at British Nationals in November last year, and there's a photo of him locking it out, or standing up with it there. To me, that lift looked good. He got red lighted on it, so it didn't count. I believe it was 2-1. I'm not sure what the exact infraction was, whether it was soft knees, soft lockout. His grip was solid. I didn't see any up-down motion, so I'm not sure exactly what it was. But if that lift would have counted, that would have given him the lightest ever 900-pound deadlift, and it only would have been 2.5 kilos below the overall biggest deadlift ever done in IPF of 411, which is held by a teamer, Sam Karadze from Georgia, who weighs like 160 plus, or weighed 160 plus at the time when he did that. And here's Sanchez Dillon, who pretty much lifted 2.5 kilos less, weighing 60 kilos less. And that would have also given him the overall world record. Again, I know I shouldn't rank on missed lifts, but that 900 pounds looked pretty damn good to me, so I'm going to mention it. There were some other lifters I was considering for the number 5 spot, but Sanchez Dillon, for me, is number 5, and I think it's a matter of time before he claims the heaviest deadlift, period, regardless of weight class, which is crazy impressive. Also, for all the sumo haters, I know you're out there. Here is your conventional deadlifter for the list. He's on here. I put him on here to please you guys. But yeah, if you are a sumo hater, then a bit of a spoiler alert, the rest of the guys on this list are all going to be sumo pullers, so you may as well leave this video now. Okay, cool. So now that all the sumo haters are gone and it's just us rational folk left, let's carry on with the list. Okay, so number 4, we have Hassan El Belghiti, who is one of the OG deadlift specialists. Not a lot of people know this guy, but this is one of the first true deadlift specialists to appear in powerlifting. So he started his career, well, he actually started his career back in the 90s, long before the IPF ever went raw. So he was actually predominantly a single ply equipped lifter, and he remained that way throughout his entire career, but he dabbled in raw here and there, mainly at Worlds and Euros meets. But he did that pretty successfully, especially when it comes to his deadlift. So at 2014 Worlds, he pulled 310 kilos in the 74 kilo weight class for what was the IPF and overall world record at the time. Now, he was 39 years old when he did that. 39 years old, and he pulled an open world record. And not only that, according to Open Powerlifting at least, that was his first ever raw meet. And I think he ended up finishing second at Worlds that year, mainly due to that huge deadlift that he had. Now that record stood for 3 years until it was broken by none other than Mr. Kjell Bakkelund, who we'll get to later on in this list. Now, Hassan El Belghiti after that dropped down to the 66s, where he spent the majority of the rest of his career, I believe. And he ended up deadlifting 298 kilos as a 66 lifter in 2019, which he did at 44 years old. 44 years old, setting open world records. These numbers, by the way, are still top numbers today. Like if you think about a 310 kilo deadlift in the 74s, yeah, the world record now is 340, but it was only a year and a half ago that record was in the 320s. So a 310 deadlift by 74 is still huge today. Same thing with 298 as a 66. In fact, that 298 at 66 stood for 4 years until it was broken by none other than Kasim Sand in 2022 when he took the IPF world record. Now I actually couldn't find footage of that 298, so here's his 297.5 that he did at 2018 Worlds a few months prior to that. But yes, Hassan El Belghiti, not a lot of people know him, but world record, IPF and overall world records in 2 separate weight classes, done as a masters lifter no less. I think he's well and truly earned his position on this list. Number 3, the deadlift demon himself. If you think deadlift specialist, this is probably the first guy you're going to think of. Enahoro Asein, the 83 kilo lifter. 380 kilos is the current IPF and overall world record in the 83s, which has stood since 2020, I believe, is when he took the first overall world record when he pulled 350 at a Hungarian meet. He first broke the IPF world record at 2021 Worlds, I believe, when it was 336 kilos at the time. So this man took the world record from 336 kilos all the way up to 380, and it doesn't look like he's slowing down. So he's definitely one of the best deadlifters we've ever seen. Not only that, but Enah epitomizes that second criteria that I had, which is using the deadlift as a weapon. His subtotal relative to the best 83s in the world is pretty far off the best, okay? However, he always deadlifts last. Not only does he always deadlift last, but he always seems to be pulling for the win. So in the last 3 world championships, literally since 2022 all the way through till 2024, Enahoro he's podiumed at Worlds, but he's pulled for the win on his final deadlift every single one of those championships. So in 2022 and 2023 against Delaney Wallace, he was giving Delaney Wallace heart attacks backstage. And in 2024, I'm sure he gave Durans a bit of a fright when he attempted 405 kilos. That's the frightening thing about Enah, is he's not scared to load whatever it takes on his final deadlift to pull him into the lead, which is exactly why he is your stereotypical deadlift specialist. Like that criteria I was talking about at the start of the video, where you're not safe. You can be beating him by, hell, 100 kilos on subtotal. He's going to be pulling. He loaded 405, and the crazy thing is, there's a photo of him there at this most recent Worlds with his last 405 deadlift for the win, and he actually got it off the floor, which is crazy. Now, he didn't go much further than what you see in that photo there, but still, the fact that he can break 405 off the floor is kind of crazy, and I think he's way above that 380. It's just we don't know what his top end is because he always just pulls what he needs to win. But I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls close to 400. Hell, even 400 maybe. You can't put it past him. He really is a freak. Number 2 is Kjell Bakkelund. Now, I'm not gonna lie, initially, pre-Sheffield, when I first started drafting this video, I had Enah in the number 2 spot and I had Kjell at number 3. But because of what Kjell did at Sheffield, I have him at number 2 now. Even though you would think that Enah is... If you think deadlift specialist, you probably think Enah before you think Kjell, because Kjell is more well-rounded with his total. And he's actually got a huge bench as well, which is kind of weird because that's usually it's opposite, right? Inverse proportional, like the bigger your deadlift is, the relatively weaker your bench seems to be. Kjell's got a bit of a unique build, as we all know. So he's kind of a push-pull guy where his squat is his weakest relative lift. But what Kjell did at Sheffield that is so impressive that I don't think anyone's ever mentioned this yet. He set a world record in his third weight class. Okay, Kjell has held a deadlift world record in 3 weight classes, 66, 74, and 83. He is the only lifter in powerlifting history to hold any form of world record in 3 separate weight classes. And trust me, I've gone through them all. I literally have a list of every single world record ever set since powerlifting went raw in 2012, both IPF and overall world records. And I can assure you, Kjell is the only one who has his name in 3 different weight classes on that list. And that's crazy. No one seems to have mentioned that. I haven't heard that or seen that mentioned anywhere else. But yeah, Kjell is insane for that. I almost made a full separate video on this fact alone, but I figured I've made enough videos on Kjell and Sheffield recently, so I didn't. But yeah, due to that reason, how can you not put him at number? I mean, the only reason he's not number 1 is because number 1 is such a freak. But number 2, I just bumped him ahead of Enah for that reason. But okay, Kjell has held so many deadlift world records and across such different time spans that I have to go through this properly. So let's start with Kjell as a 74, because that's where he was for the majority of his career, and that's where his first deadlift world record came from. So he set the overall deadlift world record in 2016 at 325 kilos, which he did at Norwegian Nationals as a 74. He later chipped that by half a kilo at 2017 Norwegian Nationals to hit 325.5. Right? So that's why he's the former overall 74 kilo deadlift world record holder. Those records actually stood, you can see there's 17-11 days, that's 4 years, until it was broken by none other than Mr. Taylor Atwood at 2021 USAPL Nationals in that famous 838.5 performance that Taylor Atwood had, where he hit 340.5, which is still the overall deadlift world record in 74s. Okay, cool. So that's the first record of Kjell. Now, he also broke the IPF deadlift record in the 74s, when at 2017 Worlds he hit 322 kilos, right? Now, that stood all the way up until 2023 Worlds, so 6 years before that was surpassed in the IPF. And that was done by none other than Tim Monagatti and Kalle Johansson at 2023 Worlds in that famous performance where they both ended up beating Taylor Atwood. Now, the crazy thing is he held the IPF world record for that entire 6-year stretch. However, he's since taken it back. So it took 6 years for someone to surpass him, only for him to take it back a few months later. So Kjell hit 330 at Euros to retake the IPF world record. And then he later upped that to 340 at the Arnold's UK meet, which is the IPF world record that still stands in the 74s. So that's why Kjell has held the 74 both IPF and overall deadlift world records for so long, was because he held them back in the day for ages. It was finally beaten, and then he came back and took it again. Now, all that is just for the 74s. Let's discuss some of his other weight class ventures. Let's talk about the 83 world record. So, in 2017 at an Arnold's European meet, Kjell hit 325.5 as an 83 to set the IPF world record. Now, I actually couldn't find any footage of that lift, so instead here I've included his IPF world record in the 74s at 2017 Worlds, where he hit 322, which is what I mentioned in the previous slide. Now, this world record in the 83s stood for almost 2 years until it was broken at 2019 Worlds. And the crazy thing is 325.5, that's only literally was 3.5 kilos heavier than what his 74 IPF world record was. So it was pretty much almost deadlifting more than the weight class above him, because he had the world record in the weight class above, which was only 3.5 kilos heavier. Now, I know we just discussed Enah, who is a 380 with his 83 world record now. So 325.5 is an 83. Relatively doesn't sound as impressive anymore these days, now that there have been a number of 800 plus pound pullers that have emerged, as crazy as that sounds. However, like I said in that Enah segment, Enahoro first took the world record when he was 336 at 2021 Worlds. So the record in 2021 was 336. Kjell set the record in 2017 at 325.5. So in the 4 years there, it only went up by 10 kilos. Now in the 4 years since 2021, it's gone up by, 44 kilos. So it's been quite a jump. But that 325.5 by Kjell stood for quite a while as one of the best lifts ever done as an 83, which is crazy. And finally, his 66 deadlift. So as we all know by now, there's been plenty, this has been the talk of the powerlifting community lately, and myself included. I've talked a lot about what Kjell did at Sheffield as a 66. And I know there's some people out there who don't find it that impressive for some reason that Kjell dropped down a weight class and hit a lower total than he previously had been hitting to win. But I've kind of made my points clear of how impressive I find that to be, because he dropped down, and the fact is he'd done something no one's ever come close to doing as a 66. His previous history at high weight classes be damned. The fact is he was a 66 when he didn't. But if you don't find the fact that he has a world record in 3 weight classes impressive, I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell you. So yeah, he obviously hit 17.5 as a 66 at Sheffield, which is the IPF world record. That's only 1 kilo behind Brian Lee for the overall world record in the 66s, which he set at 318.5 at 2023 US Nationals. And if you were watching the meet, you would know that Kjell attempted this for his second, lifted it pretty easily, but got red lighted due to his shoulders not being far enough back at lockout. Retook it on his third, made it look easy again, this time stood up with it very clearly, so it was undisputed white lights. If he had done that on his second attempt and lifted it the way he did on his third, I think he would have come out on his third attempt and attempted 330 kilos, which would be the heaviest 5 times bodyweight deadlift in powerlifting history. I say the heaviest 5 times bodyweight deadlift. There's only been one 5 times bodyweight deadlift in raw IPF powerlifting, and that was done by Dalton Lecoe in 2018 or 19, I believe. And he was actually a junior, so a 53 lifter at the time. So no one's done it in an open weight class. But I believe Kjell will be the first to do it because, yeah, I think he had 330 in him on that day. And I do believe that he's going to attempt it either at Euros or at Worlds, or hell, at World Games. I do think he's going to get that 5 times bodyweight deadlift. At which point he might be pushing that number 1 spot, because that's absolutely insane. But speaking of the number 1 spot, you guys probably know who this is if you're a fan of powerlifting. It is Mr. Deadlift himself, Krzysztof Wierzbicki. So the 93 and 105 lifter, you can see his best numbers there in the IPF, and his overall best numbers. So let's start as a 93. So Krzysztof Wierzbicki was around from the very first Raw World Championships in 2012, and from day one he was the best deadlifter. He was best deadlifter from 2012, and that culminated in as a 93 lifter in 2014 when he did 372.5 at Worlds, which not only gave him the world record, but also that was a deadlift for the win. So that also gave him the world title that year for his 3rd consecutive world title. He ended up winning 4 consecutive as a 93, plus another one as a 105 for 5 in total. But that 372.5 deadlift that he did in 2014, that stood as an IPF world record for 7 years until 2021 when Sasha Stenderbach chipped it by half a kilo at Western Europeans. 7 years that record stood for. Now he later dropped, so he later moved up to 105s, and then dropped back to the 93s in 2019, and that's when he hit his 375, which was the overall 93 world record. He did that in 2019, and that stood till 2022 when it was broken by Chance Mitchell. Okay, so that's his 93 deadlifting career. You can see how many days he's held the world record there, which is crazy. Now, as a 105, he deadlifted 390 kilos at 2017 Euros, and then later 390.5 at an international IPF meet in Iceland. So 390.5 is his heaviest ever IPF deadlift as a 105, and that stood as a world record. He did that in 2019. And that stood as an IPF world record all the way till 2024 when it was broken by none other than Sanchez Dillon, who was number 5 on this list. Now, a month after he did that 390.5, a month after he did the 390 in 2017, he ended up doing 400 at a local Polish meet. So it wasn't in the IPF, it wasn't international, hence why it's an overall world record, not an IPF world record. But he pulled 400 kilos at a Polish, I think it was a Nationals, in 2017, which is the lightest ever 400 kilo deadlift done on a stiff bar. Obviously, Sanchez Dillon has since done that in the IPF. However, this is the reason why Sanchez Dillon's 400 isn't an overall world record, because Krzysztof Wierzbicki already pulled 400 all the way back in 2017, which is wild because if you consider how rare a 400 kilo deadlift still is today, even in the super heavyweights in any weight class, the fact that Krzysztof Wierzbicki did it in 2017 is absolutely crazy. Now that record still stands today. That's why I have there that he's the current overall 105 deadlift world record holder. That still stands. Now, if you go on Open Powerlifting, you will see that there is someone by the name of Khalil Zaki, who is a tested lifter who competes in the tested division of the USPA, which is an untested federation. He deadlifted 402.5 last year, I believe, weighing under 105. So he claims to now hold that record. However, he did that in an untested federation, the tested division of it, but still untested federation, which means he did it on a deadlift bar and also different weighing conditions and all that. So for me, I don't consider that to be the overall world record. I still consider Krzysztof Wierzbicki to hold that, given that he did it on a stiff bar. I'll have my next video, I'll probably talk about the differences in untested, tested, and clear up all that because it's kind of a mess right now. But yeah, even though Open Powerlifting says Wierzbicki is no longer the world record holder, to me, he still is. And he will be until Sanchez Dillon finally ends up pulling more, which, to be fair, I don't think is going to be too long. Okay, the one final thing I will say about Krzysztof Wierzbicki is he also holds the unofficial world record for the heaviest deadlift ever. No caveats, the heaviest deadlift ever lifted off the ground was done by Krzysztof Wierzbicki. He did it in training. It was 502.5 kilos. He did it with straps, but he did it raw, so there was no suit involved. It was straps. 502.5 kilos, heavier than the Hafthor, heavier than Eddie Hall, heavier than all the top strongmen. And I don't believe he weighed too much more than like 110, 115, maybe 120. Now, obviously, that was after he left the IPF. From 2019 onwards, he left the IPF and went to do untested meets. So I can only assume he was an untested lifter. However, and I know it was done in training, it wasn't a competition, but still, there is something to be said about being the guy who can say, I've deadlifted more than anyone has ever deadlifted off the floor. So I have to mention that, that 502.5, because it is nuts. And he's also pulled some crazy, like 1,000+ pound sets in training with straps. I know people aren't a fan of the sumo and strap setup, but 502.5 is 502.5, however the hell you look at it. So yeah, I just have to mention that about him. But yes, Krzysztof Wierzbicki is my number one without a doubt. Mr. Deadlift himself, the greatest deadlifter in powerlifting history.